We are very excited to have you here to our very first webinar of 2019. And this is part of our watch series that we've been doing since 2015. And this particular webinar is on women, gender, and sexuality, identity, attraction, connection, and community. And we are really, oh, so it's got an audio, or audio has an echo. Does everyone else hear an echo from me? You heard it too. Stopped. Okay. No echo. Okay, great. Thank you. So, sorry, where was I? So anyways, welcome to our first webinar, and we're really excited for everyone to be here. Going for the agenda today, first we'll just do a quick introduction of our fabulous speakers, and I'll walk through a few things around the WELL project and in our webinar series. Then we're going to discuss sexuality, gender identity, hold a roundtable discussion, as well as do a Q&A. Okay, so for our amazing speakers, and today, well, Dazon is not here just yet, so we're kind of winging it right now. And I have not heard from her, but if she does join us, she'll introduce herself and tell you a little bit more about her, but I'm sure most of you know Dazon. We also have Gina Brown, Tiommi Jenae Luckett, Tiffany Marrero, who's joining us shortly, Maria Mejia, and myself, as well as Olivia Ford, will be co-moderating today. And we're going to ask our speakers to give a brief introduction of themselves prior to them speaking. So today's webinar is going to last approximately 90 minutes, and as I mentioned, we'll have a Q&A at the end. So you're welcome to use the chat box to communicate with other participants and panelists. You can send something directly to the panelists, or to everyone. If you have a question, there's a Q&A section that you can enter that in, and we'll use those to put those up at the end when we are doing the Q&A section. And your lines will be muted, but you can use the raise hand feature if you would like to be unmuted. And bear with me because so WATCH is our, as I mentioned, it stands for Women's Advocacy and Treatment Coalition on HIV, and it's an ongoing HIV treatment advocacy and capacity building webinar series. We've been doing this since around 2015, I believe, was our first series, and essentially we look to the community and our community advisory board to kind of help guide the topics that feel that need attention and more information to get out to others. So we encourage you to use these webinars both as an educational tool for yourself, but then to go on and share it with others. The slide sets that are used during this webinar will be available, as well as the recording, and that will be sent out to everyone who's registered, and it will also be posted on our website. You can also access our past webinars on our website. We also will be posting them on YouTube, and if you're interested in getting a certificate for completing the webinar, just please send us a note. Okay, so we have some poll questions, and we just want to make sure everyone knows that these are completely anonymous. So just answer freely, and there's no right or wrong answer. So I'll launch the first question. So the question or the statement is, I believe sexuality and gender identity, and then you can finish the sentence. Okay, we'll give this just a couple more minutes. And okay, so I'm going to end the polling. Can you all see the answers, the responses that are coming up? No. Okay, so if I end the polling, I'm not sure. Anyways, the 94% responded can be complex and fluid and are up to individuals to define for themselves, and 6% wrote, I'm not sure, and I've thought about it a lot. Okay, I can share the results. Okay, so now you can all see the results. Okay, great. Okay. Well, here's where we're going to introduce our speaker, Dazon, who is MIA at the moment. So, Olivia, did you say that you could start presenting some of this, or do you want?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, great. So
yeah, absolutely.
I'm going to hand it over to my co-moderator, Olivia, who was also the author of
So I am, I hope that Dazon will come, because she's such a phenomenal speaker that I can't even begin to hold a candle to what she would bring to this topic. But I am really honored and excited to be here. This was a really, really, really interesting and felt really important kind of fact sheet to work on. And I mean, I was the author, but it was definitely a team effort throughout the Well Project community. And just to introduce myself, for those who don't know me, my name is Olivia Ford. I am a consulting editor at the Well Project, in addition to other various activities, positions, and places I've been throughout my kind of history working with the HIV community. And just, and this is a topic that has come up through talking about sexuality and gender identity, of course, sort of throughout my work within the HIV community with the Well Project and other organizations, when I was on staff at PWN, and of course when I was writing and editing for The Body, and has also sort of come up outside of HIV. And you'll know, for folks who have looked at the fact sheet and are obviously on the webinar, this information for the most part, I mean, really it really applies across the board. It's not, this webinar's topic is expansive beyond what we experience directly in the HIV community, though, you know, we'll use our experience in that community in our community as a reference point. Throughout the webinar. And just sort of personal, or just sort of to give a little bit of context in terms of identification, because we're going to be talking about definitions around sexuality and gender identity, and I use air quotes, which I'll sort of get to a little bit later. But I do identify as a cisgender woman, Black woman, and I'm a member of the queer community and the LGBT community since, oh my gosh, for like 20 plus years. And what that kind of means for different people is going to come up as we're, you know, sort of talking as a group here. And again, we'll be looking out to see if Dazon comes on and we'll, you know, kind of tag team. But we can move on to the next slide. Oh, Tiffany's here. Hi. You're in the car. Welcome. Hi. So good to see your face and hear your voice. We're just getting started with the content part, and everyone will have a chance to intro themselves as we move on. I actually can't see I only see our faces. I don't see the screen anymore, so I don't know if the slide has advanced past the intro slide. I'm not sure what happened, but I didn't. Oh, you're not seeing the slides? Let's see. Juliana says she can't see the slides. Yeah, I see all of our lovely video faces, but I'm not seeing the shared screen anymore. Oh, and I don't hear you, sister. Oh, okay.
Oh, I can see it now.
Okay, you can see it now?
I can.
Okay, great. Sorry about that, guys. Okay, so I'll advance back to where we were. Okay, oops. There we go. Sorry.
Okay, excellent, perfect. So really with, in putting together the fact sheet that we produced a few weeks ago and this webinar, we were really looking to kind of celebrate and acknowledge and really bring more knowledge and awareness to the facts for those who may not have explored these topics in a forum like this before, that sexuality is really a spectrum. You know, there are as many ways to express sexuality as there are, as you know, in terms of people's romantic, physical, emotional attraction to other people, as there are people in the world. And you know, these categories are complex, as we talked about, as a lot of people appear to know. From the poll results, 94% of folks who have gathered here are aware of sort of the complexity and the potential to be fluid of sexuality and of gender identity as well. But yeah, we were really wanting to, you know, some of our bloggers and Girl Like Me bloggers and community advisory board members have written about sexuality and written about gender identity in ways that really just uplift the fact that connection between other people and building community around these aspects of who we are can be, I mean, categories can be awkward, but they can also be really and I think that's what happens when the slides advance, just they go away. Is everyone else seeing them, or am I just seeing video faces?
I see us.
Oh, cool. Okay, here we go. So just again, we have a lot of kind of text on the slides. We're not going to go through every word point by point, but just so that we all have kind of a basis of language that we're using in the webinar, just to give us the definition of some of these terms. When we talk about sexuality, we're really talking about the term can mean a number of things, but in the context of this webinar and here, we're going to be talking about the term as it refers to people's attraction to other people overall, and that can be called sexual orientation. There are other ways to sort of define the word sexuality, but we'll be using them less in that way here today, as it does on the slide. Next slide in the running the risk of the slides disappearing, and oh no, they didn't. But actually, you know what? If it's possible for presenters to be unmuted, I wanted to actually reach out to my sister, sibling, fellow presenter Gina, because something that was really, really great also about getting to plan this webinar together is that we got together for practice, and we had some really, really interesting conversations as we were kind of deciding how we were going to present this information. And oh, good, Gina, you're unmuted, because I remember you. What came up in our practice was something really interesting about how you kind of have come into some of these terms and kind of talked about them with your daughter. You want to share a little bit?
Yes. Hey everybody. So the first time I heard the term queer, I'll tell y'all, started off, I'm 53, so the word queer to me was not something that was affirming. In my generation, as I was, when I was young, queer meant something bad. So the first time I heard it, I was like, oh my God, you know, this. I wanted to tell the person what they were. And in talking with my daughter, who I credit her with the brain that I have today, she explained to me that sexuality that is fluid, and that there was no it's this way or that way. That is fluid, is how people identify, is how people identify themselves. So fast forward to a few months ago, y'all, I wrote a blog called I Have a Secret. And in that blog, I came out as what I said in the blog was a bisexual woman. And then doing more exploring and hearing about more terms, and then realizing that I'm more pansexual than bisexual, meaning that I'm not attracted to what's between a person's leg. I'm attracted to the energy that a person brings into the into the conversation or into my space. So yeah, it was amazing when I realized all of these things, and as I embraced them and found out more about them, then I said, you know what? For years I've been calling myself heterosexual, and I wasn't. You know, so yeah.
Yeah, indeed. And thank you for so much for sharing that, and also just really pointing up the fact that I think that folks probably on the call have experienced and on the webinar have experienced that that different terms mean different things in different contexts, right? And also, actually, I was in some of my kind of reading as I was, you know, pulling together the fact sheet. I saw there was a you know, there's lots of lists of terminology that are out there nowadays, you know, like universities have them, like university LGBTQ, you know, kind of centers will say like, we'll kind of put out these lists of definitions kind of like we have here. So this is, and one of them said something that I thought was that felt really true, which is that we call them definitions here, but try not to think of them so much as definitions as kind of beginning points for learning and research and listening to people and listening to their experience and what those terms sort of mean to them and mean on them. You know, I mean, like I really identify with what Gina was saying about being like queer. That's a bad term. I mean, when I've identified as queer since I was 20 years old, what that means for me now in my life is that I'm married to a woman. I have a little, you know, we have a little baby. But at the time, my best friend, who was a gay man, was from a place where, you know, queer is what people say when they like beat up gay people, you know, so he would never accept that as a term for himself. But it's just about understanding and listening to other people's experience and what they're saying about their experience to kind of broaden our sense of what some of those terms mean. So we're not going to go through, I'm actually really curious, as we'll kind of slowly pace through the slides, but not read through all of them. Yeah. And if people have questions about any of them, as you just sort of get a chance to skim, and I do encourage folks, if you come away from this thinking, God, I was hoping we'd go through every single definition because I don't know what a lot of them mean, definitely check out the fact sheet if you want to kind of go deeper into these are, you know, kind of this is what these, you know, this is how these terms are generally, you know, kind of applied. I encourage you to do that. But if you see any right now that are totally giving you pause and you're like, I can't leave this webinar without discussing this specifically, put it in the chat box or ask, you know, put in a little Q&A, and we won't leave you hanging. We can come back to it when we're, you know, sort of going back and forth in the discussion. But yeah, thanks for moving the slides through. Krista? Yep.
Yeah, no, I was just going to add that, you know, it's okay too if you don't know. I mean, I think that's a big part. We did this fact sheet because I think a lot of times people are in a space and they hear some of the terms and then they feel nervous that they don't know what. So it's okay to ask questions. It's okay to discuss with someone if you don't understand, because I think that's how we increase understanding and we decrease stigma. So just, you know, that's why we're trying to create like a safe environment so that you can see that we've all made, I mean, we've all not been in that position where we didn't know what a term was and when someone talked about it, and that the language is evolving, and sometimes a term that we've used in the past is no longer, you know, being used now, and so someone's going to correct us, and, you know, and it's okay. It's not, you know, people are doing it to be mean, just to like try and kind of increase our community. So.
Yeah, definitely. I cannot thank you enough, Krista, for saying that. So true. I mean, this language is, it's a living being. The language around sexuality, gender identity, it changes. it is itself fluid. Again, as we said, I mean, it's not to sort of, I don't say this to stress people out, like everyone defines these terms differently and I'll never know what people are talking about. We can start to understand and really kind of like hone our listening about people's experience and how they're kind of talking about themselves. But we can also learn more and kind of get more of a sense of terms that we may not have known before. And again, like Krista said, I mean, I learned a lot about some of these specific terms, and I feel very, very, immersed in this language in my life. And I still learned a lot from pulling together some of the, kind of some of these terms and some of these definitions, and some of the subtlety around it too. What different terms mean in different places. It's all learning. We can all be assume best intentions and be kind to one another around our learning processes as a community. So yeah, I mean, just quickly, sexuality, it includes, among other things, what people consider themselves to be identity. Maria, are you raising your hand? I'm sorry.
No, I was just saying hello to Dazon.
Oh, yay. Oh, you're here. Good. Hi, Dazon.
Hi, Dazon.
Hi, folks. I'm still trying to get so I can actually hear you. I am a little discombobulated, but hello, and I so apologize. Let me see. Uh-oh.
No worries.
Okay, now I can hear you. Hi.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Are you good to be here? I mean, it sounds like you had some stuff.
Yeah, no, I'm good to be here. I just want to make sure that I'm in a good space, that I don't lose signal too. That's all. I just want to make sure I'm still here because I'm not on my. Am I visible?
Yes.
I don't even. Oh, great, because I can't see much of anything. So yeah, I'm gonna try and do it this way instead. So maybe now I can actually see the slide. Okay. Hi everybody. I really, really apologize, but you all. It's Monday on a Tuesday. What can I say?
I know. So Dazon, so Olivia just took over in your absence, and you can just what is sexuality slide set. But before we like completely just throw you in this. Do you want to introduce yourself and say a little bit about you? And welcome. Thank you so much.
Sure. Hi, and thank you all. And I am again just deeply apologetic for the craziness of my life. I'm in a hashtag FML mode and have been, and no sleep too. So it's crazy pants. But anyway, so for those who don't know, I'm Dazon, and I'm Dazon Dixon Diallo, founder and president of SisterLove in Atlanta and in South Africa. We are 30 years old this year, a sexual and reproductive justice organization with a thick lens on HIV and AIDS, particularly in women and girls of African descent, by extension their communities, and by extension all women in all our diversities and those who love us. That's not our formal mission. That's how I describe my role. And I'm really happy to be on this call and on this conversation, because I think that a large part of what is challenging about doing our work around not just HIV per se, but doing our work around sexual and reproductive well-being, including health, rights, and justice, is that we have not yet claimed our proper place as women, as more than half the human race on this planet, that we have a place and power in the sexual and sexuality paradigm. And so when it comes to figuring out solutions around sexually transmitted infections or HIV or dealing with reproductive rights, abortion, contraception, and all of the things that should just be rightfully ours because we're born, and we're born with the identities, the sexualities, and the genders that we have, that we have to consistently fight for that place, because we don't yet have a real powerful collective context for defending and asserting our human right to sex and sexuality as people who are women in our diversity. So that's why I'm excited, and to talk about some of the basic stuff, you know, just to get the words rolling around in our mouths and our brains, and to have a conversation with each other about what we know, what we don't know, what we've learned, what we've lived with, what has worked, what hasn't worked, and how we can benefit from having these kinds of conversations, and how we take that further into our community. So when we talk about, for example, just having a slide that says, what is sexuality? You know, just sitting down and having a moment to, somebody asked me that one time, when somebody asked me, what is sex? Or what is sexuality? And the first thing I could think of is connection. It's connecting. It's connecting. And it's not, you know, for anyone to decide why I'm connecting, how I'm connecting, with whom I'm connecting, or we're connecting, or they're connecting. It's that it is another form of human connection that is a part of human development, and is a part of humanity. And actually it's a part of all life, because everything living has had to have some. So anyway, when we go specifically in on the terminology, we can have a conversation, because now we're working with words that everybody can focus on and talk about, and they're not all of these slang things that may or may not make me feel one way or another. So sexuality includes things like identity, in terms of what a person or a group determines themselves to be based on their own sense of their sexual desires, which is also part of sexuality, who they feel attracted to or attracted by, and their behaviors, which is how they act in terms of being sexual with another person or other people. So all of these things come together, but they don't always line up real nice, right? Because we're consistently arguing for the right to women to have sexual expression. You know, some people may be too young to remember that in the early days of feminism, there were women who were stripping and burning their bras, because it was in that early activist sense, extremist, to allow men of people of male gender to expose their breasts, but not women, because of what that meant in terms of objectification of women's bodies and women's breasts. And there were other people who thought that, well, women's breasts are to serve a nutritional purpose and should be protected and should be revered and all of that kind of stuff. So it's all about how somebody's own desires and their own behaviors line up with their own identity that defines their sexuality. And they give an example around someone who has a woman partner may not be lesbian. So same gender sexuality also has become a lot more acceptable. I know that in terms of some of the commentary around how we deal with stigma, and that's coming up in a little bit later of the conversation, how we're dealing with stigma, is that people who are LGBTQ parts of the queer spectrum are oftentimes only seen as sexual beings and not as human beings. And so the fact that the LGBTQ fight for equality has brought more people to the acceptance realm, that same-gender sexuality is not necessarily seen only in the sexual context. It is now that people are also seen for who they are as people. But that doesn't mean that understanding that sexuality has a whole array of experiences means that people have to be more accepting and understanding, or at least respectful of the rights of everyone's sexuality. And so when we talk about sexual minorities, for example, the sexual minority folks are less likely to even be white than they are non-LGBT in terms of the population. So there's a way to identify people in the margins through their sexuality, but it's not the only way to identify people in the margins. So we have a next poll question, or is this our first?
Yeah, this is our second, so I'll pull it up 1 second.
Okay.
Okay. All right, so this question is, how would you describe your sexuality, i.e. identity, desires, and/or behavior? And again, this is anonymous. There's no connection answer. Okay, we'll have this go on for just a couple, like 10 more seconds. Okay, I'm gonna end the poll and then I'll share the results with everyone. So as you can see, we're definitely across the board. So 14% straight as an arrow, 29% straight but not narrow, 14% not straight, 14% not heterosexual, 21% LGBT community member, 7% something else entirely, and 14% it's complicated.
Love it.
Yes. All right. So.
All right. So thank you for that. And I should have hit other because my personal choice for my identity in that regard is, yes, I'm the straight girl with the queer eye. Okay, so when we talk about gender identity, that's a little bit of a shift, right? Because a lot of folks sort of conflate sex, sexuality, and gender. And all three are very different things. So sexuality would be about who or what a person is attracted to, what gets them excited, aroused, hot, what makes them attractive, what makes something attractive. Gender is about how a person feels they are inside. And in this instance, is going to be based on the social construct of trying to find your place somewhere inside the dominant binary of male, female, man, woman, right? So men and women are gender identity. Male and female, if you are looking at it strictly in the biological context, male and female are, in the biological context, scientific terms, for lack of a better way to describe it. And the fact that the social construct of gender and the biological construct of sex oftentimes clash in society when the majority or the dominant culture has defined for all culture what those identities are. And so you have other identities that come under LGBTQ, like trans. You also now have folks that are non-gender conforming because they reject every form of the spectrum, every part of the spectrum of the binary. There is no binary for them. And then there, of course, are all kinds of different sexuality identities. Talk about binaries, like I just mentioned there. The overarching construct of the gender binary is that there are two, and that there's on one end of the spectrum male, on the other end of the spectrum female. Now, for those who are homophobic, transphobic, sexphobic, peoplephobic, they are more likely to conscribe to. I love that, Gina Brown. Yes. Gina, I love that. So the binary construct fits very comfortably for people who are fearing, hating, anti anyone who is different from them and is in what we might consider sexual or gender minority. There are gender identities beyond and within men and women. And when we say that men and women terminology is a social construct, it's because we have socially assigned activities, responsibilities, emotional behaviors, reactions, ways of thinking, ways of being. We have socially prescribed and conscribed who fits inside those boxes based on what we think they look like based on that binary. So when we say it often gets confused with sex, that's what we mean. Regardless of your gender identity, the body has what it has, whether it has certain DNA, whether it has certain chromosomes, or whether it has certain body parts. And those things can oftentimes in the scientific world get conscribed along a binary from physical, if it's not real. The gender gets prescribed by social, cultural ideology on who should be doing what based on those bodies. When we're talking about gender identity, these are just some of those identities that are language that some has been around a long time, some has been in the language a long time, but not used in this way for a long time. But you'll oftentimes hear some of these different kinds of expressions like butch, which might subscribe to a more masculine identity for queer women, or cisgender, which tends to blend the biological assignment of sex and the sexual, or the gender identity of someone. So cisgender would be someone in the general sense of it who biologically align in their birth biology along identity or their gender identity. And then you have femme and you have gender expression, which just means who you are and how you express yourself. The gender minority are those folks who differ from what we talked about already in terms of the supremacist heteronormative structure that makes up our society. We already talked about gender nonconforming and gender queer, which are folks who basically reject any fixed notion of gender and also reject the binary construct. And intersex is more of a biological construct in that some people's bodies don't fit within the narrow definitions of biological presentation of male and female, because they may have all or some parts of both genitals. They may have an extra chromosome that creates those genitals, that the physical expression of that extra chromosome creates the additional genitals. So there's other terminologies like non-binary, and which fits with some of the others, in terms of different ways to express that I reject being boxed. And transgender, someone who has a gender identity that does not necessarily align with the sex they were assigned at birth. And then two-spirit is an umbrella term that's predominantly used by indigenous people in North America, that talks about identities beyond the binaries, and not just gender identities, but also sexual identities beyond the binaries.
Okay.
If we can keep moving, because we want to get to our panelist conversation.
Yeah, I think so. So let me forward through here. Okay, we have another poll question. And launch. Okay, so before today, how familiar were you with the sexuality and gender identity definitions presented here? Okay. We'll give this another 5 seconds to respond. Well, we have a very knowledgeable group. Okay, I'm going to end the poll, share the results. So 60% are very familiar with all the terms and use them in their work and or life, which is amazing. We need you to help share this awareness. 33% familiar with some of the terms, and 7% heard many of the terms but didn't know what a lot of them meant. So,
you know, Krista, I think for a group that's disinformed, another really good question, and that may come up, I want to throw it out here for our panelists, is, well, we have, you know, almost better than 2/3 of us are very familiar. There's another question of how many of us have been in debates with people who either knew these terms or had not heard of these terms, have been in different debates about when, how, and why these terms are even in use now, or how comfortable or uncomfortable people are with using those terms. I think that's another question, because I think those of us who even are familiar with the terms are not necessarily everybody is comfortable with them, even as we are allies or we are members of any of these different identities or communities. Next slide, so we can get through. So there's this process that's been added to spaces that are intentionally being inclusive, and a lot of that is about identifying based on pronouns, right? And there are two ways that I will talk about this very quickly. One is that obviously there's pronouns in the English language that identify along the binary. People are choosing to use the pronouns that fit most appropriately with them. And some people choose no pronouns at all and say, just call me by my name. And so this is the day of supporting the autonomy and the liberty and the right to self-identify. But there's also the fact that when people are being treated with disrespect because they're not being recognized by the identity that they choose or that they have or that they are, and that they choose to express, means that they are not being afforded their full protection, that they're not being treated properly either in the healthcare industry or anywhere else when their chosen way of being identified is disrespected. And so learning to share pronouns and respect those pronouns is extremely important. And I think we talked about this a little bit, but the overall thing around, I think, dealing with HIV stigma, dealing with trans stigma, dealing with healthcare stigma, especially in the realm of sexually transmitted diseases, is because we still have an overarching thickness of sexual stigma. And so in many cultures, if not almost all of them, there are different people who are, who have stigmas against folks who are not strictly heterosexual, who are not strictly married, who are not strictly older than 18, who are not strictly of the right ilk, of the right nationality. There are all kinds of reasons to stigmatize folks' sexuality. And there are also reasons that folks, especially women, internally stigmatize our own sex, whether it's an HIV diagnosis, whether it's shame around sex work or unintended pregnancy or multiple partners, whatever it is, we oftentimes internalize some of that stigma ourselves. And so this is why oftentimes people keep things about their sexuality and their sexual health secret, including their sexual and gender identities, because some stigmas turned into discrimination, and that discrimination can also turn into violence, can turn into maltreatment and abuse, but can also, including depression and suicide ideation. So stigma is not just about being mean or about being discriminatory. Stigma is about being, I think, at the end of the day, potentially violent. Next slide. So we know what some of those examples look like, and I'm sure our panel will talk about them, because where there are no laws that explicitly protect everyone equally, there are opportunities for laws, for policies, and for law enforcement and other regulatory bodies to exact that stigma on people like they have in Tanzania. There's an example here about ordering the roundup and arrest of queer folks in Dar es Salaam in Tanzania. It should be also stated that the same politician also calls for all girls who fall pregnant to not be allowed to go to school. So there's all kinds of ways that sexual stigma can be meted out or exacted out on people that has long-lasting impact on their livelihoods and on their well-being. Next slide. Some more examples. The Kill the Gays bill, which attempted to actually create people who were accused and subsequently convicted of being in same-sex relationships. And of course, we know that there's still ongoing violence in the United States around stigma, especially towards our trans experienced family members. Next slide. And so, I mean, even in countries where someone might go to prison, that there are folks who are still fighting everywhere. I actually even know in some of these places where folks have almost some sort of underground railroad or community where when people have been identified, they are able to help those folks stay alive, literally. And of course, we are all celebrating that in India this past year, the Supreme Court removed the criminalization laws around same-gender relations. Next slide. Now, if they could do that for women, that would be great. I wanted to just very quickly, the fact that we're talking about these things as individual issues around stigma or group identity issues, there's also the fact that sexuality is a human right, that my sexual identity, my gender identity, and my sexual expression is a right that is recognized globally inside certain different treaties and codified human rights agreements to the UN system. And so we just have a list on the next couple of slides that sort of compound what we're talking about in terms of sexual rights being those rights based on our freedom, dignity, and equality and expression of sexuality. So if you would just flip through the next couple of slides, that gives you just a running list of what some of those rights are or should be. The right to our own freedom of sexual expression, so pleasure, can we all say pleasure is actually a right and should be if it's not protected, and that there's information, education, and health services. Thank you, Trina. Health services and choices around reproduction are all a part of our sexual human rights. Pleasure is a right. And then, of course, where our fight goes to the core of all of this is that in today's HIV fight, that the issue around stigma and sexuality among people who are living with HIV is real, and that the advocacy around LGBTQ rights and expressions and equality has also shaped how folks living with HIV have been able to assert the fight against stigma for people living with HIV and their sexuality, sexual identity, sexual expression, and sexual pleasure. And you know, we've been in a lot of spaces where we've talked about the debate that's why the science, the new news around PrEP, or the new news around U equals U, treatment as prevention, that these new scientific proven interventions, if you will, in terms of getting people the treatment that they need, regardless of their HIV status, means that we have another, I guess, tool or brush in our makeup kit or weapon in our arsenal to fight the stigma of the sexual stigma against people living with it. And this continues to talk about the history of how they've been built, and the fact that when we talk about women living with HIV and sexual stigma, there's several additional jeopardies that are extended by the fact that women also have to be concerned about pregnancy and pregnancy options and the safest way to have the healthiest children and families that they choose to have, and to do so the way everybody else who is able to have children can do it, which is having sex the way they pleasurably want to have it. Next slide. So a little bit more in terms of the stigma and sexuality in the HIV community. And thank you, Tiffany, you are absolutely right. That a large part of the issue around the sexual rights movement was Black queer women, and young people, and I want to be clear about that as well. And that we're also dealing with the sexual stigma around trans experienced people and how much more vulnerable our trans experienced family are in terms of sexuality, sexual stigma, and especially sexual expression and sexual pleasure. And the fact that there are folks who are of trans experience who are not just trans women, but also trans men who are vulnerable to sexual stigma, discrimination, and violence in their day-to-day experiences as well. Next slide. And I'm wanting to be conscious of the time, Krista. I don't know if we need to, cleaned up.
We're just a poll question, and then we're pretty much ready to get into the roundtable.
Excellent.
So which of these statements are true for you? And you can check more than one. And remember, if you have any questions, just put them in the Q&A for us. Okay, I'm going to just close this up in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay. So you can see that the majority feel that the HIV community has been a space where people feel comfortable expressing their sexuality and or gender identity. So, and I think that
that sort of sums it up for why I like working in the field I like working in. Yeah. But also, I would add, if it comes up in the panel discussion, if there's another question I would throw in there, is what other spaces might folks feel comfortable expressing their sexuality or their gender identity other than or outside of the HIV community? I would be interested to hear that in the discussion. So in terms of looking at why these conversations and learning as much as we can about the basics of talking about and expressing ourselves around sexuality and gender with a clear, common understanding, is that because if we don't have this common understanding, it's hard for us to find our own voice and to build our community. And that the safety of our community, that the respect for our community, that the isolation in our community are all parts of why it's important for us to land on the common language and common understanding that begins to deconstruct, to dismantle, to destroy these constructs that box other people based on being different, that hurt other people based on fear, and that exclude people from their full humanity based on power and control. And so when we take power and control over the language, over the words, over how we respond to the words, then we are more likely and more able to find our voice individually as well as collectively, and that becomes a part of how we know that no matter what happens in the one space where you are, that you're not alone, because we just saw through some of our polling that a lot of us are experiencing a lot of these things in the same way, both positively and negatively. And that's, I think, probably the most important lesson around learning why. Getting on the same page around this terminology and how we talk about it is so important. So there are some spaces where these conversations are happening, and they're here on the slide. They will be available to you. We have folks who are going to be in our conversation coming up, who have also provided some of their own written expressions. And with that, I want to thank you for the time. I want to thank you even more for your forgiveness for me coming in late in your time, and for your understanding that I'm a Black woman living in the South, running a Black women's organization, and the struggle is real. So thank you very, very much for your time, and I look forward to listening to our panelists. Thanks, Olivia and Kristen.
Thank you, Dazon, so much, and thank you for just jumping right in and doing such an amazing job. So we appreciate your being able to make time despite all the obstacles. So we are really excited to kind of move on to the roundtable discussion, and just so you know that, I mean, all of this is to say that, I mean, we want to get, focus on the part around, the pleasure of sexuality, and that is a huge part of what this discussion is trying to get to. But we felt that, in that process, it was really important that we kind of lay some groundwork so people are clear and that there's, less misinformation. So the conversation is going to kind of go in different directions. But first, we just would like, maybe in the order that's on the slide, which is alphabetical, that each person introduces themselves and are part of our panel, and just a little bit of, part of your reason or kind of discussion or to be part of this panel and what brought you here. So Gina, you want to start?
Excuse me.
Oh, wait, you're muted too. Gosh, why is this doing this? Unmute. Okay, there you go.
Okay, hey everybody, I'm Gina. Once again, a woman living with HIV almost 25 years. And as I said earlier, I identify as a pansexual woman. And a term that I've just started to embrace about myself. I've always known my sexuality since I was 13, but I never acted on it. And if you don't know my story, you can go to our blogs and read I Have a Secret, my blog about coming out as a 52-year-old woman in the South, a Black woman in the South. So, thank you.
Thanks, Gina. I'm Tiommi Luckett. I am a trans woman living with HIV, also in the South. And I came to the Well Project in 2015 after being introduced to Kristen Maria in 2014. I am the communications assistant as well as the Black Project coordinator at Positive Women's Network, and I sit on the community advisory board for the Well Project as well as a blogger for A Girl Like Me. I have written several blogs on like the stigma that I faced, whether it was the internalized stigma from my gender identity, right? And like having to come to terms with, there was absolutely nothing wrong with my sexual attraction to cisgender men. But where I battled with it was I never felt like a gay male. And so I didn't have the term transgender in my vocabulary until I got in the HIV movement. And that's when I really started to see myself reflected in communities, and that's what brought me here. And I'm sorry, I will remember to hold my mic. I've never had to do it before. Everyone heard me just fine. So I'll do my best.
Thank you. And Tiffany? Let me see. You're not. Okay.
Okay,
Okay.
can you hear me?
Yep.
Can you hear me? Hi, everybody.
Hey, Tiff.
I've been waiting the whole time to say I love everybody. You're all glowing. All over your skin looks so good. You're my favorite. Tiommi, you look like amazing. Olivia, your hair is looking good. Maria, oh my God, your blouse so good. Krista, I love lipstick. Everyone, so John, this class has been looking so amazing. I recently so my name's Tiffany Marrero. I am also a woman in the South. I am right now I'm in Florida, so most of my folks are here, so I feel really happy. And for me, so I will kind of piggyback off of what Tiommi was saying. I recently got into actual HIV work fairly recently, but I've been living with HIV my whole lifespan as someone who obtained HIV through vertical transmission. And when I was recently in vertical transmission as mother to child, we don't want to shame the mom. So one thing I recently looked up into pleasure activism and how we can use our pleasure to fight oppression. And I feel like women in HIV especially can utilize like pleasure, right? But I was recently joking with a friend that like we got all this like untouchable likeness in our bodies, but like what are we utilizing them for? Like, you know, like now that you're really healthy and you're really out there in the community, do what Gina did, like just figure out, you're like, nah, bye, I'm pan. And the only way you're gonna figure that out is if you do some stuff with some folks and do all this community stuff and here as your pleasure activist or local pleasure peer coordinating activist here. So if you're trying to figure out after you get undetectable what to do with your stuffs, let me know. I got you. I'm gonna encourage it. I encourage all of us to get as much pleasure. Some of y'all need some. So pleasure in your lives. Love you.
Thank you. More soon. Maria?
Hello, everyone. Very happy to be here with all of you, and I'm here also learning. I started blogging with a Well Project when it was just basically almost, I guess, starting like maybe 9 years ago. And in their tab, and also global ambassador, and I'm a long-term survivor. Coming up in April, which is April 11th is my birthday, but April 18th is my HIV birthday. It's 31 years, and just glad that I've made it this far. As far as my personal experience with sexuality, I never really liked labels. I'm learning about the new terminology through the millennials and the younger activists, not only as far as sexuality, but even as, like, for example, that calling myself Latinx, or even knowing what, calling myself cisgender woman, because at the beginning, I'm kind of like very stubborn and I don't like people who put terminologies or labels on me. But I understood, and it was explained to me that, for example, using Latinx to describe myself or my community was to include everyone. And once it was explained to me in the correct form, of course I am for that, and I will always support that. I also, like Gina, considered myself bisexual, but then I realized that, like I always said, even before I even knew the terminology that I'm calling myself now, which is pansexual, even though I don't like labels, I just feel that like Gina, when I fall in love with someone, I don't fall in love with their gender. I fall in love with their spirit. I fall in love with their soul. It is more to me than like a genital or a physical thing. It's like a spiritual connection for me. So it doesn't matter what gender they are. And so yeah, the LGBTQ, even the queer part, just like Gina, so I guess we're from the old school, I'm not calling ourselves old, but it's, the reality. I also consider it a slur because that's what I heard, people saying, oh, that effing queer, or, hearing it as a slur, as something that, and so it's been hard to process that queer, try to change it in my mind that it's something that is okay to hear, because I was like freaked out when I first heard it, people describing themselves like that. But, the newer generation has taught us that. I used to think that the Q stood for questioning. So I'm in a learning process myself with all this two spirits, and like I discussed with Tiommi when we're preparing for this about the non-binary. I was like, okay, what is okay? All these terminologies I need to get really more, even being a part of this community, and so I have to learn all these new things that are coming up more and more and more. So I'm in a learning process with everyone, and
Oh, it froze?
Maria froze.
Oh, sorry, I was on mute. Maria, Olivia, do you want to kick off our questions, and then I'll see if we can get Maria back up and running.
Yeah, no problem. And that was really, Maria definitely set up the kind of back and forth really beautifully. Oh, it's back. Yay.
Back. Okay.
I lost connection and I came back. So like I was and this, I even came to the understanding of myself, even though I don't like labels that I might be two-spirit, because I believe everybody has a divine masculine and the divine feminine in them. But that's my view about myself. I can't impose that on no one else, because someone else may be like, well, I don't have those two, and whatever, I just don't like people that push things on me, so I don't push things on them. And I also have found in my community, and even with the LGBTQ community, that there's a lot of discrimination with bisexual people. They're not really too accepted sometimes because they describe them as someone that they're not defined. They say, well, if you're a bisexual woman, you're gonna end up having your little experiences with women, like as a cisgender woman. That's what I was told always since I was young. You have to define yourself. You got to make a choice. And just like with the bisexual males, a lot of people are like, there is no such thing as bisexual male. If you sleep with a man, you are a gay man. But if you sleep with a trans woman, you are a gay man. And there's a lot of labels between them. And even with my experience with my ex, as Lisa, she was a butch lesbian. And then a trans, she didn't even know she was trans, like Tiommi described herself. And then came into, after, the 9th year into our relationship, understood what he was, and he is a trans man. And when I would talk about that with my some fellow advocates that were gay males, they were like, well, he's a trans man, like, I guess that that must be very hard for you, because you're a lesbian. And I said, no. I always believed that we were going to be together forever, because that's what you believe when you love someone. And the media labeled me as a lesbian. So I will always say to them, okay, fine. I guess that's what you want to label me as a lesbian, because that's what we were. That's how we described ourselves, I guess. And they labeled me. But I would always mention that it's not about a label. It's about loving someone's soul. And that's why it didn't even bother me when we transitioned, because I was okay, because I loved his soul. And so sometimes we have to look within our own community and start there, because if we have discrimination within our own community, what can we expect from people that already have a personal vendetta against us, or calls us deviants, like they've called me a million times? Oh, I love your work, but you're a deviant. I don't respect you no more because of who you are or what you like. You're going to burn in hell, and all these horrible things, that just people do. So that's my 2 cents.
Thank you so much for that. Thank you so much for sharing. All of you are just giving me life. It's really, really amazing to hear your experiences. Before we move on, because I know that there's been a couple of points as folks have been speaking where they kind of touched on sort of clarifying what some of the terms mean to them. I just want to open up the field really quickly before I ask a question of our panel. If there's anybody else who has anything that they kind of want to add or share, specifically around, because we're unpacking a lot of terminology, if anyone wants to share what any of the terms mean to them if they haven't already, or if they want to clarify anything, any misconceptions that they have been aware of throughout the community that they want to take an opportunity to kind of debunk now. No pressure, but I just wanted to open the space because especially what you were saying, Maria, kind of opened that up. So I wanted to see if anybody else wants to add anything before the next question.
Thank you. So I just wanted to add to the conversation that, you know, when it is, and this is my experience, being within community, within the HIV community, what has frequently been crossed up with some people, most people that I interact with, people that I meet, not interact with, but people who I meet in places like conferences, right, is that they don't understand the difference between my gender identity and my sexuality, right? And no, I'm not in these spaces simply to meet you because we're Facebook friends and we can go off and possibly have a soiree. That's not why I'm here, right? So it also brought up the point, you know, where Maria said that she thought that the Q was questioning, right? I don't think that, you know, and we're talking about sexuality, so I'm okay with talking about sex. I'm a sexual being, right? Okay. But I'm attracted to who I'm attracted to, right? And it may not be so deep for me at times as to like look into the person's soul and see if, you know, like we're compatible. Sometimes I just want that itch scratched, right? But I know where I can get that. And I didn't go to a conference for that, right? So what I'm saying is, you know, yes, I speak about being a trans woman living with HIV. It's probably on billboards somewhere, you know, in that I am who I am, but people get caught up in the idea of what I am versus actually accepting who I am for me, right? And we're sexual beings and we're in this space, but I'm not in this space to have sex or to be your first, or for you to answer the question if you like trans women, right? I don't think that I should be the one that you approach. And it happens a lot in spaces. And it's not just cis men. Cis gay men have been inappropriate. Cis women have been inappropriate, right? When we're in spaces together, because it kind of makes me feel like I'm not valued as a whole person. I'm seen as like simply for my identity, right? And they want to satisfy some kind of curiosity. Mm-hmm. That has nothing to do with me. You're gonna have to figure that out on your own, right? Mm-hmm. I'm not gonna help you label yourself because I reject a lot of labels. I really do, so I understand that. But that stigma that we feel is real. It is real inside the HIV community. I've been attacked for being a trans woman, an out and proud trans woman living with HIV, actually doing the work, trying to do something good because the opportunity didn't fall in the lap of someone else. You know, well, I didn't ask for it, but here we are. Here we are. We all have a purpose, and you know what? I don't run from mine. And I will also try to elevate your platform, do as much as I can to educate you on how to get to where you're going. That's part of the work that I do. So it does have me interacting with people constantly, you know, but at the end of the day, I just want to be Tiommi. I don't want to be that trans woman. I don't want to be that trans woman living with HIV. I just simply want to be Tiommi. And it has transferred, like, there's no way that I can escape my life. I can't. I thought I could with an app. I thought I could. I had a screen name. Nobody knew me. Boom. I was good for a year. Don't know what happened, but now people know that I'm trans and they've actually gotten to see me like on video, and that brought it up a whole different can of worms, right? But we did have the conversation about sexuality being fluid, right? And how it is okay to be attracted to the essence of a person, to the soul of a person versus the actual genitalia that the person carries, right? And so I wanted to mention that because this was a conversation that I had with people outside of the community. You know, cisgender, my Black people, we had an intelligent conversation where there was no judgment. There was no judgment, and people were trying to figure themselves out, like just from a conversation, but we were willing to have the conversation on a grand scale, you know, in an area that I possibly wouldn't have been able to reach. So that's what I wanted to add to the conversation.
Thank you so much. Oh, absolutely. So many thanks, Tiommi, for bringing those really, really important points into this discussion for us to have as part of our thinking, and not only here, but going forward as well.
Mm-hmm.
Really appreciate you so much, always. Tiffany, I think you said that you, over here in the chat box, you're mentioning that you had a point. I think that you're muted, though. You need to be unmuted.
I was. Hi. So, kind of like piggybacking again off of a lot of what Tiommi was saying. So, for the panelists and for the attendees, and if you're watching this, and maybe you're thinking that you also too want to just kind of go out on a limb and test your sexuality in the world. So, I just want to throw out some. I want us to really start breaking traditions, like that the sexual traditions that we often carry. I want, especially Black and brown people, I want us to start really thinking intentionally about where a lot of our shame comes from. Intentionally talking about how we can take out, as a woman, how can I love and live out loud in my sexuality, in my expression, outside of a cis heterosexual white man's perspective, because I think that's a lot of our issues too, especially for a lot of us Black women, is that everything that we know, at least that I grew up with sexually, all the porn I watched, all the toys I saw, a lot of it is whitewashed as fuck. It is there's so much whiteness, there's so much cisness, there's so much male patriarchy to a lot of the sexuality notes and messaging that I have gotten over my life, that as we start to do more of these panels, as people start to really start to expand out and ask more questions, I want us to make sure that that we're making sure that our sexuality is our own, and that we're not simply trying to navigate within this white hetero cis normal framework, because it's really toxic. So if a white man, cis straight heterosexual white man, came up and said these are the guidelines for sexuality, gender, and sex, and I'm a Black queer woman from the South living with HIV who has lots of sex and does all these crazy things, how am I supposed to believe in myself? How am I supposed to find empowerment and love if I'm thinking that that's the only way, right? So marriage is the only way, house is the only way. So when I come up and I say, well, what about polyamory? And people go, oh wow. Keep in mind, a lot of people remember, a lot of folks, I think a lot of us we come here and we think of very USA, a very United States, whitewashed ideology. Remember, there's a whole other globe out there of what pleasure activism can really look like. And I want to also put a word out there to our organizers. Why are we organizing? Why are we trying to get, for example, Black women together to take their meds, to then go and talk about policy, to then get these laws to be nicer to us, for us and turn around and then still burn up from shame and not allow ourselves to really bask in the work that we're doing? So I highly, highly, highly stress to a lot of our activists who are organizing, take pleasure activism really, really, really serious. Because I just really believe that one of the biggest ways that we can fight oppression, we can bring down numbers, we can fight HIV rates and all those great things, is if we remind ourselves that we are allowed pleasure, we deserve pleasure. And I think take this panel that we have now, take all these women you're listening to, all these voices, and think, how can I turn the pleasure that I like into something that I can use to fight oppression at any level, at homelessness, HIV and AIDS, poverty, racism, whatever I want to fight. So I'm using my untouchable pussy as a statement to fight oppression, because that shit's untouchable. It doesn't mean that people still think I should be allowed to have sex. Regardless, I'm going to go ahead and have sex, do my own thing, and I'm going to let y'all know I'm having it. And some folks are not going to like that at all. Because what are we, as Black women? We're Jezebels, we're men, all these things that we're again. So I highly stress everyone here, keep on existing, post about it, talk about it, write about it, blog about it, whatever you gotta do, keep on getting pleasure. This is how we beat oppression. Show these white folks out here, show these patriotic motherfuckers out here that, especially Black people, that we are allowed pleasure and greatness. And then,
Indeed. Indeed. Thank you. So well put. So well put. And that's a really beautiful, I think that's a really, really fantastic kind of lead into, I'm going to put this question out to the panel. And I also want to put it out to the attendees too, because folks are there, they're answering poll questions. If these folks have been a little bit quiet, we have a chat box, we have Q&A. I would love it if attendees could also respond to this question too that I'm going to put to the panel. Amen indeed. And ashe. I would love if our panelists, as we get closer to the Q&A kind of section, the last little bit of section, we just have a few minutes for Q&A. I wonder if y'all would share about 5 words or so on what affirming and celebrating your sexuality and or your gender identity means to you. So I want to put that to our panel, and I want to put it to our attendees as well. If you feel moved to answer in the chat box, I know the chat box is not anonymous, so it'll be by your name, but we're all family here. So if you feel moved to share.
Olivia, excuse me. I just want to piggyback on what Tiff said.
Please. Oh gosh, yeah.
Talking about pleasure. When I was in Amsterdam last summer, I was speaking to some women from over there, and they were telling me that when they talk to their daughters about sex, they talk about how sex is pleasurable. They don't talk about, like, when we talk about sex over here, we're like, you know, you don't want to do that. You want to wait till you're married. Boys talk about you. We never talk about how good it feels. We never talk about, we were young at one point and we had a lot of sex, you know. And so when I came home, I was talking to my daughter about that. And she was like, where were you when I was being raised? And I said, I guess I was there. She said, evidently you weren't. She said, because you don't remember, you used to talk like that to me. You told me sex felt good. You told me sex felt good without a condom. You told me why people had sex. And I was like, I did? And she said, yeah. She was like, yes. And that's why I'm the person that I am. And I never even realized I did that. So I want to encourage us as American women, regardless of our race, when we're talking about sex, let's talk about how pleasurable it is. Whether you're having sex with a man, a woman, a person, a transgender person, whoever you're having sex with, it feels good. And we love it. That's why we do it. So thanks, Tiff, for bringing that into the room.
I wanted to add something from what Gina said. Unfortunately, from my upbringing, I was like she expressed from some people that sex is made to be looked as something dirty, as a taboo, as something that we don't talk about in the household. I was never, no one ever talked to me about sex. I learned about sex in the street. That's how I got HIV at the age of 15. And obviously I'm a survivor of sexual abuse as a child. So I was sexualized as a child, and I guess that's where all of the things that I heard in my upbringing about being dirty and disgusting, I felt a lot of shame and I felt very dirty inside. And now that I am 45 years old, I have finally come to the conclusion to understand that it is my human and divine right to feel pleasure. That it is okay to say that it is okay to like you all said, that it is my human right to be okay with expressing my love for sex, because I am a human being. We're all sexual beings, and that's how we got here. So, but it took a lot of time and to process that inside, that sex was not bad, that sex was not dirty, because I did see it as something dirty, not only because how I was raised in the religion that I was raised in as an ultra-conservative Catholic family, but also because of what happened to me as a child. I saw it as something disgusting. I felt disgusted sometimes when I was having sex, and I hated myself. So it's been a long process that a lot of people go through, men and women, and by that I mean all of us human beings, that sometimes we ourselves have to work on that and get therapy for that, not to feel that sex is disgusting, because of what happened to us, and that we could live fulfilling sexual lives and feel pleasure, and that it is okay, that you're not a whore because you feel pleasure because you are having sex or making love. I like to call it more making love, but that's just my opinion. And I guess that's something that I wanted to add.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. And I know that, and this came up again in our conversations and around putting together this resource as well, is that reclaiming around sexuality after it's been taken from us in some kinds of ways, perhaps when we're young or past experiences, is part of that, as part of sort of claiming that power. And that was part of sort of what I was saying, not to repeat what you're saying, Maria. I couldn't possibly say it as beautifully as you did, but that's such a huge part of so many folks' journey in claiming their power. And thank you so much for sharing that. Thank you so much for sharing that. Anybody else? This is really, this is such an amazing conversation. I'm so glad that we're all gathered here. And thank you so much for sharing your experiences so generously. We just have a couple of minutes. Does anyone else from the panel have anything to add? Is there anything coming up in the chat box in terms of our attendees, panelists, loves? Spaces,
5 words?
Bring your 5 words, yes. What's
I
celebrating
am who I am, okay? It's not up for discussion. It is not up for debate. It does not require anyone's approval. This is my life, and because of the decisions that I've made for my life, I've actually severed relationships with family members, and we're not in the best of places right now. So it tends to keep me away from family functions. But at the end of the day, when I go to sleep, I can go to sleep peacefully knowing that I am comfortable in the skin that I am in and who I say that I am, and whomever I decide I want to be with, they will have to accept me, flaws and all. I am not your fantasy. I'm a real person. So I love you back, Tiff. I love you back. And to carry on the point that Tiff brought up, I'm in a place now to where I have complete bodily autonomy over who I choose to share my body with, right? And so the reason why I have sex is simply for pleasure. It is not to it is not to appease someone. It is all about me. You know, I've gotten to know what I like. I am comfortable, like I said, in the skin that I'm in. That means all of me. I will never change any part of myself in order to make the next person happy. There was a time when I did that, and I was absolutely miserable. I choose to be happy today. And my happiness is not reflected on anyone else liking me for being happy.
I guess for me, yes, Tim. Yeah, I agree, girl. For me, I think the words that I think about, especially since last year in Amsterdam, was I should have did this shit 40 years ago. You know, if I did this 40 years ago, y'all, there's no telling. But I know things happen in its own time. But I didn't tell y'all this, but one of the most impactful things that came with me writing that blog was I had other women who I've known for years and years, Black women, come up to me and hug me and whisper in my ear that they felt the exact same way. And here I was thinking I was the only woman that felt this way, you know. So sometimes when we talk about things, y'all, we're not the only ones, and we give people space to be able to talk about it also. So let's not forget that. So thank you, Crystal, Olivia, Maria, Tiommi, Tiffany, Dazon. I love y'all. And all the participants.
I think Tiffany wanted to add, but she's on mute.
I need Tiffany.
Well, did we freeze? I think, Olivia, you may have, oh no, you're back. You there?
Yep. Can you hear me?
Were you just talking or was someone else chiming in?
No, I was just saying, Tiommi said that Tiffany had something to say, but she's muted. So I need to unmute her. Or she needs to unmute herself.
Okay.
Free Tiffany.
All right, Dazon, thank you so much. Dazon's taking off, and I know we're going to be wrapping up. I just want to say, for Dazon, please, thank you very much, and and just thank you to everyone for sharing. But Tiffany, go ahead.
I'm really quick, something that Tiommi told me a long time ago. Wasn't that long, like the PWN sent me, but you know. And it was like the gospel, and it was like around the lines, like, if I tell my story, if I don't know the exact words, I know how it made me feel when Tiommi said it. So when Tiommi was like, if I put my stuff out there, then nobody else can use my own lived experience or my things against me. Did I say it? I think right. That's what I felt. I feel like what Gina's saying. By us expressing how we're feeling, by us talking, having these panels and writing about it, and being very out there, this is like, you think, well, how can we reduce stigma? You don't have to be a peer. You don't have to be a commercial. You don't have to do any of that. You literally just exist. You exist.
The microphone.
Enough. Sorry. That's it.
Sorry, we lost that last little bit. Did other people have audio problems with that last little part?
Yes.
No, you heard it fine, so maybe it's me. Okay, sorry. All right.
Tiffany's muted.
I know now she is. But I heard the tremendous, amazing words that you said. We are a little bit past time. I want to respect folks' time, but this conversation has been amazing. Folks got to share many more than 5 words about celebrating and affirming identity, which is really, really beautiful. Just want to continue to have the floor open. If anyone else has anything to add, that was a beautiful point on which to close, if we're closing, but if anybody wants to add anything else, please do. As I imagine people will start to need to go because we're a little bit past time. But I just want to,
thank everyone so much.
Individually and as a group.
Yes, and we know everyone has to leave. Thank you for sharing like all your experiences, and we look forward to getting this out to a larger audience via the recording. And thanks to all the participants. We'll follow up with you soon.
All right.
All right, love you guys.
Thank you all so much. From the bottom of my heart. Thank you so much for being here.
I love you too, Tiffany.
Tiffany, I'll see you soon. Tiffany.
Wants to be muted. All right. All right, thank you. Bye.
Bye, guys.
Bye, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. Have a wonderful day.
Yes.